Hello, everyone. My name's Alan Tucker, and today I'm going to be talking about designing environments. So I started out with this really big question. How do we design environments that encourage civic engagement? At the core of this is what does it mean to embody democratic or pro-social outcomes? Okay, Tony Fry, a critical design theorist, talks about how, at least in the West, democracy is more of a consumerist democracy, right? We watch democracy happen elsewhere. We watch politics happen on the big screen. Red versus blue. Who's gonna win? Will fascism take down democracy? Tune in next week. And then we go to the voting booth. We write in our on the little check boxes, and then we put our paper in, and that's the extent of the civic experience. So, how do we embody pro-social outcomes in our day-to-day life? How does democracy become not symbolic, but more of an action that we do? As well, this also ties into sustainability, right? Sustainability is not just allocating more tax money to solar panels, but has more to do with the water we drink and the food we eat and the parts and technology that we acquire and how does that all get to us, right? The supply chains. So what does it mean for sustainability to be more of an embodied action? Okay, in order to talk about this, we have to talk about embodied cognition. Maturana, a big proponent of embodied cognition, um, and with Ledvin, McCulloch, and Pitts, did a study on frogs' eyes in which they found different cells in the frog's eye communicated different information to the frog's brain. One was more focused on contrast, the other one is more focused on movement. Human eyes work the same. Now, why is this important? This suggests that the information that is in our head is actually pre-filtered by our eyes. This challenges the rational approach of perception. This idea that we're watching like a camera-like recording of objective reality, but instead we're actually pre-filtering that image, right? So what this suggests is that we're embodied beings in the world, right? We are ecological beings. We don't exist as sort of always rational and objective. And that's where Foucault comes in, because Foucault talks about how the definition of man is sort of a rational, objective, economic being. And he talks about how that has changed over time. And now we're in this rational, realist approach. But it could be that our ecology has more to do with our behavior and cognitive state than we actually realize. So that's what I set out to explore. The first study that I want to talk about is walking through architectural spaces. So this study had different people in different room clusters in a virtual reality experience. So the rooms had different interior architecture, right? Different interior design. And what they found was curved architecture was not only more pleasurable as a self-reported phenomenon, right? They reported that it was more pleasurable, but also that different parts of the brain through EEG readings lit up more reliably for curved architecture, which means that not only on the subjective level, but also the way our brains perceived the environment. It had a different effect. Our interior design had an effect, right? So if you take a look here, right, the top is like a low pleasure arousal situation, whereas the bottom is curved and decorated was more of a high pleasure and high arousal setting, right, for our brains. So this is talking about how our interior design, our actual physical design, human design things has effect on our cognitive state. This one is about how nature might actually lead to more cooperative outcomes. So in this study, they had one group watch BBC's Planet Earth series, and another group watch like a documentary on New York City architecture. And then after this, they went and they played a social dilemma game around fishing. Right? The social dilemma game had to do with fishing to gain money, but if you overfish, you can actually cause problems for the rest of the players in the game and lead to ecosystem impacts, right? What they found was that the players who watched the BBC's Planet Earth series first, before playing the game, actually were more cooperative with all the other players in the game, and they led to better ecosystems for the fish, right? So they did not overfish. Okay, so here's what it looks like. This game is Fish 3, done by Gifford, Jonas Gifford, and Robert Gifford. And so it's really interesting. Perhaps just being in nature might lead us to be more cooperative with other people. This one has to do with eye level greenness Does more nature lead us to be more calm while driving? Okay, so this one, they had people do a 60-minute two-way driving task. They had them do a visual analog scale, which was like rating their frustration before driving, during driving, and after driving. And unfortunately, the study had a lot of limitations because it was a real world experiment. So there was things like traffic and all of these things that wasn't really accounted for in the study. But what they found was that longer trips with more eye level greenness led to less frustration over time, right? So as you can see here in these graphs, we have the change in frustration. We have L1, which is the least naturable experience, whereas L7 is the most nature experience, right? But if you look here, it's kind of interesting because L1, L2, L3, L4, L5, not much change, right? In fact, the frustration is getting slightly worse, and then it goes down to L6 and L7. So this is an interesting study, but it leads to the idea that more greenness might cause less angry drivers, which is actually a better outcome, right? Perhaps if we could cooperate on the road. So that's an interesting study to bring into our ecological design, how we design roadways. Soundscapes. Have you thought about how soundscapes affect your mood? I'm sure you all listen to music. Well, it's actually widely researched that soundscapes have a real impact on cognitive state, especially nature sounds can actually lead to positive mental health benefits. Being embraced in nature and the sounds you hear has been linked to higher, positive, happier feelings, right? This study had to do with, does tempo lead us to be more social? So, does the tempo of the sound affect how we engage with other people? So this one was a virtual reality experiment in which they walked through an environment, and they could go and they could meet up with groups and have conversations with groups in the game. And the goal, what the researchers did is they changed the tempo to see if that would change their willingness to be pro-social. And what they found was that sociability, like pre-sociability before the experience, was more positive indicator for how social you were going to be in the experience. So they found that tempo had a little to no effect on how pro-social you were. But what was really interesting was that the pro-social people were more attuned to the fact that the soundscape was changing tempo. That's really interesting. So is it that more social people are more attuned to soundscapes? Really interesting. Yeah, so as you can see here, willingness for social interaction here on the left side, and then the social support condition. What they found was that, there really is not enough statistical significant data to suggest that tempo has any sort of effect. So what all of this leads to is environmental psychology, having an understanding that environments and our ecology do affect our cognitive state. So there is a possibility that we can actually change the way we design cities in order to affect more pro-social outcomes. And that's why I wanted to replicate with all these studies is different methods for understanding what environmental cues or changes can lead to different outcomes. But what I didn't find was specifically experimental study on civic experiences. There was a lot to do with games that existed. They played those games with a different population and saw what happened, but it wasn't experimental. They didn't have like an independent and dependent variable. So that's what I'm interested in doing for my study. The idea is that participants exposed to uplifting soundscapes and awe-inspiring scenery will be more likely to engage in pro-social civic opportunities. So, what if we had different groups go through different virtual environments, not in VR, just in normal 3D with different soundscapes, right? One would be very full of nature and trees and birds and rivers, and the other one would be a dirty factory grunting and exhaustion, right, experience. And then after that, we gave them the opportunity to sign a petition or provide an opinion on a forum, or we had them self-rate on a Likert scale, right? So that would the goal would be to see, can the environment change the opportunity to share an opinion or be more pro-social. The participants would be, middle-aged, have an understanding of politics, but not have a PhD in political science, and have no strict party affiliation. And the procedure would have to do something of a pre-survey in order to understand their political affiliation and their willingness to be social. And then they would go through the environment, and then we'd have them see if they would sign this petition or something like that. I think that it's really interesting to suggest that the way we design cities might possibly affect our democracy in the future. Thank you. I'm really looking forward to your questions and your feedback.